When all the tech goes awry, right?
Very good. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Some hardy folks are here in person, and some of you are home, hopefully dry and toasty inside. Before we get started with tonight's program, just a couple housekeeping things. If you are watching this on YouTube, do note there is a Zoom link in the comments if you prefer to do this by Zoom. You can also enter any questions you have. If you go to Zoom, you can put the question in there in the comments or the Q&A. If you want to drop a question in the comments on YouTube, you are welcome to. Do know, though, there is quite a lag as to when it actually pops up. So you'll want to do that as soon as you think of the question, in hopes that we will actually see it by the time we are done tonight. And as we normally do, we'll be addressing questions at the end. If we do not get to your question and you would like to email us, please feel free. I believe May has put the email address in the YouTube comments as well. And then, of course, you can always go to the Capitol's website, find our contact section there, or the last slide I have tonight has our contact information as well. So also, for those of us who are in person, I am ignoring my phone, but if everybody's phone starts to beep and there is a tornado warning, we will recess and go over into one of the orientation rooms that has no glass. So we will be at that point in time underground. And as our director likes to say, this is probably the safest building in Lansing, honestly. You know, whatever weather has thrown at us in the last 145 years, the Capitol's fine. So I'm going to trust we'll all be okay. But thank you again for braving the weather to come out tonight. So tonight's program is on the Michigan Female College, which is kind of one of those obscure things in Lansing history that most of us have never heard of. And to be frank, I had never heard of it until I started doing Lansing history over a decade ago. It ties into so many different topics, though. It ties into the history of our capitals, specifically the second building that we'll talk about tonight. It's a story of Lansing history. It's a story of women's history. And it's also a story that is tied very intricately with our major public universities in this state. Here on this slide, you will see photos of a couple friends of mine that I politely asked if I could include in my PowerPoint. The truth is, today, women make up actually a majority of both students at our public institutions in Michigan and also graduates from. And this is not unique to our state. This is true across the country. Women attend colleges and universities in significant numbers, and they are women in academia overall, including in professorships and in publications and so on. Women are represented in ever increasingly large numbers. But this is actually a really modern phenomenon. Women have not been going to college and to universities in Michigan for a long time because they could not get accepted. Even those who wanted to go could not. Now, tonight, we're going to be focusing on 3 specific universities, and you're going to have to bear with me because I will not be calling them necessarily by their modern names. So when I refer to the university, I'm talking about the University of Michigan. And no, this is not just me being a U of M snob, though I am a proud alum. This is me alluding to the fact that in the 19th century, it was the only university in Michigan. So it was the university, the only one. And university and college are going to be 2 different things in the 19th century. So we're going to talk about different levels of education that today to us seem parallel. They were not at the time. Colleges in a 19th century sense were much, much closer to what we would today consider a high school or prep school, or maybe kind of, you know, like intro community college level of education. We will be talking about Eastern Michigan as the normal school. Normal schools were, of course, created to teach teachers how to teach. And this was a new thing in the 19th century. In many small schools, you didn't have to worry about any credentials at all. If you had passed and graduated, well, golly gee, must be you can teach other people how to do this too. Now, if you came to our program a few months ago where we talked about the Superintendent of Public Instruction's office, you learned a little bit about how teacher licensing came about in Michigan in the 19th century and how that changed. We're going to be talking mid-19th century. So at this point in time, Eastern is the only normal school. Though, of course, we will later get Central and Northern and Western, which are also teacher colleges early on. And then we're going to talk about that place 4 miles down the road, which I know a lot of you who are in this room are affiliated with. This is going to be the school I refer to as the Ag College or the Ag School, because of course it was created to teach farmers how to farm, which was also kind of controversial because there were many people who said, you're just born a farmer, you grew up on a farm, you know how to do this. But this speaks to the rise of scientific farming and the idea that breeding is important and studying diseases and looking at agriculture in a more scientific, orderly way, with the idea that it will benefit society as a whole. So it's hard to know when you start with a really big topic like women's education, where in the world do you start? I threw a pin in a map basically and said, let's start 500 years ago. So just as a really, really rough entry point, I want us to think about both the Renaissance and the Reformation. These are two things that Western culture experiences around the same time. They are tied together. And of course, both are also tied to the rise of the printing press. And literacy is very important as we talk about education. There's a back and forth, though, in this conversation. We often think about the Renaissance as the era of the revival of classical learning. So we're going back and we're rediscovering texts, ironically preserved in monasteries, from pagan Greeks and Romans. So we are studying Homer, we are reading the Iliad, and classical education, as it were, based on those Greek and Roman texts and traditions and art, those are going to be dominant in Western higher education into and through the 19th century. There's also an argument to be made that women were largely left out of this. There are universities in Europe at this point in time. They are for men. And in general, for the next 400 years, people are going to assume universities are for men. They are to train men for 3 professions or to prepare them for 3 professions. For the church, because most universities historically are religiously affiliated. That's not true in Michigan. For medicine. So if you are going to practice medicine, you will go, and learn about the humors, if you will, if we're talking 500 years ago, and the law. And these are still the 3 professions that men are learning when they go to university in the 19th century. At the same time that there is this rise in education through the Renaissance, there is also a give and take happening religiously. The Reformation brings about the rise of Western Protestantism. And in a lot of Protestant sects, one of their fundamentals is everyone needs to learn to read the Bible. The idea that you have access to scripture yourself. So you must be literate. It is not a coincidence that the Bible is produced in huge numbers in this period, and arguably it is Gutenberg's Bibles and many others who kind of helped kick this whole thing off. And there is an argument some people are making from day one that you need both men and women to be literate so they can read the scriptures. Now, it doesn't mean they can do the same things with the scriptures once they've read them, but even women are good enough to read the Bible, even if they can't then teach it to others. On the other hand, though, you also have a decline in educational institutions because while Protestants are emphasizing literacy and emphasizing education, at the same time, Catholic educational institutions are closing, where the Catholic Church is being pushed out. So you think about a place like England, where you have a very interesting iteration of the Reformation. Thank you, Henry VIII, wanting a divorce from his wife. In that case, you have Catholic monasteries, Catholic convents, Catholic schools closing. And this was seen as a good thing by some who were part of the new Protestant movement. By others, it was mourned. We are losing our educational institutions because traditionally education and religion went together. That's hard for us to wrap our minds around as Americans because we live in a country where public schools are the norm and public education is emphasized. So I have a picture here of Catherine Van Bora Luther, most famous for being the wife of Martin Luther. She was actually a sister who was in a convent and therefore would have had access to more texts, would have had more educational opportunities. She, of course, leaves the church, becomes part of this new Lutheran thing, marries the most famous leader of it. But that also means that the educational opportunities she had have now gone away for others. So it's really a double-edged sword. And there are some women, particularly in England, and as a history of American history, whether I should or not, I see a lot of things in our past sort of tied back to England. There are women like Bethusa Macon who are arguing, even in the 16th or 17th century, it is through education that women can have more opportunities. Now, she was an aristocrat. She had an unusually good education. Most upper class English aristocrats at this time, and this is true, I think, throughout Europe, would educate their children at home. You know, this is like posh homeschooling. You have tutors and governesses and so on come in and teach your children languages. But she argued that women shouldn't be limited to learning sort of decorative things. They should be able to learn Greek and learn Latin and learn astronomy and learn all of these subjects normally reserved for boys. And she, as herself a literate woman, and as someone who was actually the governess to the king's daughter at one point in time, now that didn't end so well because this daughter was the daughter of Charles I. So she eventually ends up out of a job. She actually writes an essay on this, and she publishes an argument that women need access to education so they can support themselves, so they have opportunities in the world other than relying on their fathers or their husbands to provide for them. Now, when we think about colonial American education at the most basic level, so this is the lowest level, think like pre-K, K at best. In America, we have dame schools. We don't have a big educational system from go, in part because we don't have a state church. So there's no Catholic church or Anglican church to come in and set up the whole thing based on the parish system. So it often became the jobs of older women who were widowed, who didn't have much else they could do to earn a few pennies, to try to educate the children in the village. These are all self-starting, independent, very local things. It could have been a handful of families. They're called dame schools traditionally. Here you can see a very romantic interpretation of one by an artist. And at this level, boys and girls are studying together. Now, they are learning the basics. They're learning numbers, they're learning letters, they're going to learn certain prayers, they may learn a catechism if they're all of the same religious denomination. But even here at this level, you're going to see girls being taught different things. So girls may spend part of their time at the school practicing sewing or knitting. There is also, even at this level for small children, a conversation about should girls learn to just read or should girls learn to read and write? The implication is everyone should learn to read so they can take stuff in. It all goes back to, again, we should all be able to read the scriptures, if nothing else. But if you can write, that suggests you actually have an idea in your head worth producing, worth putting on paper. Bless you. That's a little more than some people could stomach. Now, anything beyond a dame school in the East is going to be segregated by sex. And in many places, the early common schools even, so what we would today think of as kind of like the one-room schoolhouse, the public school, those are going to be primarily for boys. And it will be up to the individual teacher if they are willing to let girls come in, at least for part of the day. Or in some cases, they might teach the boys for 5 hours and then the girls get 1 hour at the end if they want to come, or maybe they get an hour in the morning. So it is very, very piecemeal up and down most of the East Coast. Now the conversation starts to change in the early Republican period. And when I say Republican here, note the little r. I'm not talking partisan politics. I'm talking America is a republic kind of Republican. In the early Republican period, this phenomenon that today historians call American Republican motherhood starts to come up. Because in America, we suddenly realize if we're going to have a government that is comprised of people who are elected to office, well, we need to make sure our voters know what they're doing. We need voters who are literate, who can absorb information, and who can hopefully make an educated choice about who they are selecting for office. Even more so, we need to raise up smart young citizens, meaning men, who can hold office themselves someday. And in order to get those little boys on a good start, they need an educated mother. Now, are women arguing they need an education 100% of the time because everybody's going to grow up and get married and be a mommy? Not necessarily. Statistics tell us that's not how society works. But that is the assumption for most women. And so it becomes the reason, or perhaps the excuse, I like to think, that women are able to get more education. So there are more girls going to school now alongside their brothers. They may not be taught the same things necessarily, but they are at least going into that classroom together. Now in 1817, so this is 12 years into the territorial period, 20 years still before statehood, three really interesting guys from really different backgrounds get together in Detroit and cook up the idea of a university. But this is more than a university. This is a statewide education system. It's almost like a branch system, but if we had something like Wisconsin has, where you start all the way down at the bottom and you can go all the way up through graduate work in a statewide system of public schools. This was what they envisioned. These three people come from extremely different points of view. One is a Catholic priest. His name is Gabriel Richard, and he is famous for many reasons. He was very much a Renaissance man. The second is John Monteith, who was a Presbyterian minister. The third is Augustus Woodward, who is best known as a judge in the Michigan Territory. He is, historians argue, probably a deist in terms of religion. So because these three men probably agree on nothing when it comes to religion, ground rule number one is this new university in Michigan is not going to have a religious affiliation. It is not going to be Baptist or Methodist or Catholic or Lutheran or anything else. It's going to be open to all. They call it the Coeducation. That will be on trivia night. This is a discussion if you're online. We were talking earlier about how we should have a trivia night for those of you who've been coming for a long time to these. The Coeducation. Now it is capitalized here because it was the proper name they gave it, but this is little c Catholic. That is the root of this word. So this is Catholic in terms of universal, not big C Catholic in terms of Catholic Church proper. It was a very grand idea. The truth is, it was way too grand of an idea for Michigan's resources at the time, both in terms of money and also in terms of kids who were actually prepared to go to a university. So this largely exists on paper, and there are some classes held in Detroit in this building. Ultimately, the whole thing will kind of fizzle, and it is only in 1837 when the university relocates to Ann Arbor that it gets sort of a jolt and gets up and going again. So like the state, the university has multiple founding dates. Now, there is a caveat to this. While the university is never a religious system, in an attempt to build this statewide network of institutions, they do form partnerships with what they call branch schools. So in some cases, these are religious colleges, so not universities, colleges. And they are okay working with different denominations as long as they're different denominations. So it's not like the whole system all the way across the board is X. One of those branch institutions is the Huron Valley branch, which is run by American Baptists out of Kalamazoo. This will ultimately become Kalamazoo College as we know it today. And that's going to be important later on in our story. The University of Michigan by the 1850s is up and going and is really different from what is happening in most places in the country by this point. The Midwest, of course, when you think about even the Northwest Ordinance, we're supposed to forever encourage the development of education in this part of the country. It's the Midwest that really starts to develop these public universities. And the University of Michigan is kind of held up as the cream of the crop within. And so as we talk about U of M tonight, we have to realize people outside of the state were watching what U of M did because they were seen as sort of a leader. But there were plenty of things they didn't do, like they did not accept women. In fact, the only place that would accept women for higher education in the pre-Civil War period was the Michigan State Normal School, which of course is not a proper college or university. Now the Normal School is founded in 1849. This of course is in Ypsilanti. And from day one, they have way more female students enrolling than they want because these female students want more education. Most of them, many of them, don't necessarily care to be teachers. They just want to learn more. And this is the only place their parents can afford to send them. Or maybe they come from a family that doesn't have its own religious institution. Or maybe they do not want to go to a religiously affiliated school. You know, yes, there was what would become Kalamazoo College. There was Albion College. There was Hillsdale. There was Olivet. But if you're not one of that denomination, or if it's hundreds of miles away, maybe you want another alternative. And there were discussions. What do we do? Do we deny these students? How do we filter out the people who don't want to be teachers? Because that's what we're supposed to be doing. They tried to make them sign a pledge for a while. I promise I will go into teaching. Well, how do you actually enforce that once they're no longer your student? And even the idea that there was a normal school, that there is an ag school created in 1855, this all shows that Michigan is really thinking differently about education. We're not afraid to try new things. We weren't the first to have a normal school in the country, but we were early. We were the first in the Midwest. We were not the first to have an ag school. The difference is our ag school lasted. The others, like those failed attempts in upstate New York, didn't make it very long. So the fact that we were willing to try these things shows that, frankly, the legislature was willing to invest dollars into the idea. And these are the stories we know of because they lasted. But there were other people saying, oh, well, what if we start a college for girls? What if we start a female seminary? Then that would be a place that girls who would otherwise just go to the normal school, or girls who want to go to the university, that would be a place where they could go. And that is actually endorsed by the governor in 1855, and it is discussed that same year by the legislature, though obviously nothing happens with it. Now enter into our story two sisters from New York, Abigail and Delia Rogers. I only have this photo of Abigail to show you, and that is in some ways representative of the two sisters. Abigail was the public sister. She was the one who spoke. She was the one who led. She was the one who was out on front on issues. Her sister Delia was the quiet one standing a step behind her. They moved together largely as adults. They supported one another. Once they make it to Michigan and launch the female college, they will lead that together, but it is always Abigail's name who is on the letterhead. And she is the one at the public events. Now, these sisters are from New York, upstate New York. This, of course, is a very radical place in the 19th century. Their family that's still buried in New York, their parents are buried in a cemetery in Rochester, in which Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony are also buried. I was super excited when I figured that out a few years ago as I was wandering my way through Western New York. This is not that far from Seneca Falls. You know, this was a really hopping place, full of radical ideas. This is the same part of the country that you see a lot of religious movements and end times movements, and you see abolitionists and suffragists and people who are testing boundaries in a lot of ways. And the Rogers sisters clearly grew up in an odd family in that the family sent all of their children, boys and girls, to the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary, which was a private institution, but it was the highest level of education they could get in their area. And their older sister, Eliza, actually becomes the first female preceptress. So by the time Eliza has graduated, the female department is large enough to need its own leader, and she fills that role. So it doesn't hurt that she marries a minister who ends up running the place on the men's side. After Eliza has to step down because she's got a couple kids, her sister Abigail takes over. Now, Abigail and Delia both graduate from the seminary. And again, this has nothing to do with preparing for the church, different kind of seminary. And Abigail has already by this point in time worked in a couple different girls' schools. So she's been in leadership at one out in White Plains, New York, which is today just outside of New York City. She has led another women's school in Ontario. So she is clearly looking to get experience and trying to figure out what's going on out there and how she can be a part of it. Possibly through their religious networks, they find out that there are openings at the Wesleyan Seminary in Albion, Michigan. So they pick up and they move to Michigan, and they both start on faculty at what is today Albion College. But they don't stay terribly long, because soon they get job offers to go down to Ypsilanti. And Abigail will become the first female preceptress at the normal school. So this means, in terms of the educational hierarchy in Michigan, she is the ranking female in the state, because she is leading the women's department at the only place that will admit women. And as one of her students later wrote, this was where she kind of started to talk about the awakening that was happening in her own brain. This is where she starts to really think about what kind of a public role she can assume in this fight for co-education. This quote reads, "It was in this normal school that she became more directly a recognized champion of the education interests of women. Her practical eye clearly saw that a chief cause of the multitude of failures of women in the various avenues of life was the lack of thorough preparation for her duties. She believed that a woman has a right to do whatever she can do well, and for what she does well, she will receive adequate compensation." Doesn't that sound nice? So she is making this argument in the early 1850s, when most people cannot imagine a woman going to college, let alone actually having to support herself. But she was not the average woman. You can look at this argument, though, and this is so similar to the argument Methuselah-Macon was making in England 300 years, 250 years before. And she's not the only one talking about this out loud. By the 1850s, there are petitions being sent to multiple legislatures regarding more educational opportunities for women. Now, these petitions, in some cases, survive in full text in old House and Senate journals, or in the old documents accompanying the House and Senate journals that they published at this time. We don't have all of them, but we have some. And in some cases, we even have the names listed of the people who were supporting them. And they're not just coming from Ypsilanti, they're coming from multiple cities and villages across Michigan. And this, of course, speaks to the fact that in American government, we as citizens, and this is a very broad citizen, this isn't just the voting public, we as women also have the ability to petition. Now, I would argue it took some guts for those women to sign on to a petition. This would have been kind of a masculine thing for some of them to do. But you will see in some instances in households where both a husband and wife sign their names separately to show we both support this. And that makes a statement unto itself. One of the women who signed this when she was younger than the image you see here was Augusta Chapin. Augusta Chapin was a young woman who felt a call from God. She believed God was calling her into the ministry. Now, you want to talk about radical in the 1850s? Oh my gosh, St. Paul is rolling over in his grave. Augusta Chapin knew that the university would not necessarily put her in a denomination where she could be ordained, but it would give her Greek, it would give her Latin, it would give her Hebrew, it would give her higher learning that would help her religious studies. So she wanted to go to the university. Now, she was denied admittance to the university. There are women who will also, in addition to petitioning the legislature, will petition the Board of Regents, because it is the Board of Regents who, as of the 1850 Constitution, are now elected by voters. The Board of Regents decide who gets in. Now, what are they using for their criteria? Well, they have that sort of vague plan that Woodward and Monteith and Richard cooked up in the 18 teens That is still considered to be kind of the foundational document. And it includes language about women for the lower levels of education. In fact, they mandated that these branch schools provide education for men and women both. Didn't mean they were always learning the same things, but they both had to have some sort of schooling available at that high school level. And so this means that girls who go to these institutions could, in theory, also be considered prepared for the university. But the university won't admit them. The regents say, nope, you've done all you can. Sorry, try again, or go do something else. Now, there's also a public conversation going on amongst teachers themselves, who in the 1850s form the Michigan State Teachers Association. They will change their names a couple times. This is a really, really, really big tent teacher association that includes everybody from local schools who can join all the way up through folks in administration at the university. They would have conferences. They published a monthly journal. These survive over in the Library of Michigan. And at these conferences, they would get together and they would chew on issues like coeducation. Not surprisingly, at least Abigail, I'm not sure about Delia, attended these conferences. And not only did she attend them, she spoke at them, which also took courage because most people did not think it was appropriate for women to stand up and give speeches in front of mixed audiences that included men of their own age. Abigail writes numerous articles for this publication over the years. Here is a snippet of one where she talks about the fact that anyone who becomes a teacher, she feels, should hold themselves to a higher standard and should be willing to push. Now, following basic English grammar, she writes he as the unnamed subject, but given who she was and what she was arguing, I'm going to read it substituting she. It is the unquestionable duty of every human being, a duty to which she owes both God and man, to develop and cultivate to the utmost extent of her ability all the powers with which she is gifted, she said. The teacher who is thus ready to combat public opinion when it is wrong, and she feels it needful, will find that he wakes into life and activity the dormant sense and sensibility of those who oppose him. In other words, she is telling herself, I need to do this. I am a teacher. I must be a leader. I must step forward. Now, ultimately, as I said, in 1855, there is a discussion about, should we start a female seminary? Should there be a women's equivalent to the University of Michigan? And ultimately, it doesn't get funded, doesn't happen. And this response appears in the March issue of the Journal of Education. Perhaps this is best, wrote an editor. There is one preliminary question which we should settle before establishing any more separate schools for females. It is whether the true philosophy of education does not point to the education of the sexes in the same institution, and our university and colleges should be required to admit ladies. Colleges, because now, 1855, this is when we create the Ag College. And though it won't start admitting people and actually teaching classes for another 2 years, it now at least exists on paper. Now, Eliza Rogers Seeger, this is the oldest sister. She is now back serving as female preceptress again at the Genesee Seminary. And she writes in, probably through her sisters in Michigan, and says this in one of the Michigan journals. One great obstacle to the extension of a liberal and large system of female education is the prevalence of the feeling that the two sexes must be educated differently and apart. This is one of those afflicting pieces of absurdity, which escapes amidivertism because custom and fashion have so long thrown over it their sanction. So she is saying, I help run a co-ed educational institution. It works just fine. Children are not running amok. Girls are not getting into trouble. This is not a bad thing. As boys and girls coexist together at home, so they can at school. So the Rogers sisters, after the state does nothing, and after the regents do nothing, the Rogers sisters decide, well, somebody's got to do something. So in October of 1855, they opened their own school in Lansing. They don't do it in Ypsilanti. They don't do it in Ann Arbor. They do it in Lansing. And clearly there was support, including someone heavens, I wish I knew who worked in the second Capitol, because they get permission to hold their classes in the second Capitol building. Now, everybody in this room knows that when you come to Lansing and hang out a shingle, it often is because you want to put yourself under the nose of the legislature. You want to remind them that you exist every day. You want to, sort of seep into that subconscious in the hopes that eventually they'll notice you and throw some money your way. Actually getting space in the Capitol, though, that's another whole level. Now, to be fair, if you've come to these programs, we talk about how this building also functioned as a community center. So early on, there were churches that met in the chambers on the weekends. There were veterans organizations and fraternal organizations who would meet here, but they're not doing it 5 or 6 days a week. They were literally setting up shop in the chambers for this school. Now, they call themselves the Female College and Preparatory School for Boys and Girls, because the truth is they need every last student they can to try to get this thing financially afloat. The second thing is the Rogers sisters' ultimate goal is to prove that boys and girls can learn together. They call themselves the Female College because they want to push that agenda, but they want to prove that boys and girls can learn together, that they can learn the same subjects and succeed at the same rates. And also, as one of its early students and the niece of the Rogers sisters would say later on, college was really a stretch for this institution. The truth is most of their students early on were young. Again, they would not turn a potential student away. They had a co-ed faculty, as you will see here. Abigail actually brings some of their friends up from Ypsilanti with them, and they set up shop. They will meet in that second Capitol for about 1.25 years. So they will finish out 1855. They will meet through 1856. And then in early 1857, they have to move out because the legislature is back in town and they need their chambers. So they will temporarily relocate to a hotel across the street while the actual building they will commission is still being constructed. But throughout the years, you see in newspaper article after newspaper article, they keep coming back to the Capitol. They come back for their commencement celebrations. They come back for evening entertainments where girls will recite and give musical performances. They want the public to see them and to acknowledge them, and they do it in the Capitol building. Abigail knows what she's doing. She also makes a point when the legislature is in town to have an evening festivity. So all of the legislators are invited down to come see the Female College and see how well those students are doing. She also invites the press in. This long newspaper article is written in a very complimentary fashion by a journalist who went to one of these evening entertainments. Ironically, it is an Ann Arbor paper, though, that this comment comes from, which is such a double-edged piece of writing. If any of our readers have daughters to send abroad, they cannot do better than to place them in the Michigan Female College. They cannot do better because it's a great institution, or they cannot do better because no one else will take them. Now, this building I alluded to is relatively modest. It is located in what is today known as Old Town. At the time, it would have been North Lansing. And there is exactly one historical photograph of it known to survive. This is in the collection of the Capital Area District Library. And unfortunately, it's a negative that has been badly scratched over the years. It is basically one wing of what the Female College hoped to be, which is what you see in this drawing over here. Ultimately, the property after the Female College closes would be sold to the Oddfellows, who would have an institution there for a few years. That didn't work financially. The state will pick it up in 1879, and in 1880, they will open the Michigan School for the Blind there. And if you go to the old School for the Blind campus, to this day, the original building, which is not what you see on your screen, but is on a similar site, it's called the Abigail, in homage to Abigail Rogers. Now, they never managed to finance the whole building, but I cannot imagine how many students were really excited when they saw this on an envelope with correspondence coming in. I'm not sure what their reaction would have been when they actually set foot on campus then and realized that it was much smaller. You will see here again, Miss A.C. Rogers is the principal. So again, Abigail is the public figure in all of this. And they are going to draw, in some cases, people from states away You can see this particular piece of letter of this envelope has an address of New Jersey on it. There are many Michigan families who send their children here, many Lansing families. They have financial backers across the state. The most prominent local name that some of us still know today is O.M. Barnes, was a financial backer. He was a railroad magnate and lawyer. One of the early students to attend is Augusta Chapin, and they will very happily claim her as an alum. She will go on to enter the ministry. In fact, if you can read the script on this card, she was ordained in Lansing, Michigan in 1863. Imagine that. There were people in Lansing radical enough to do that. Now, they were Unitarians. So we see here the Unitarian church that was located not too far away. She would ultimately pastor numerous congregations in mid-Michigan, including also a Unitarian church out in Mason. And then she would later move on to other states. So here you can see this is from when she was in the Universalist Church in Oak Park, Illinois. Now, over the years, Abigail takes every opportunity she can to keep the female college out there. And she does not shy away from bringing her college and the ag school together. So you will see some events where they are physically going out to the ag school, or the ag school boys are coming into Lansing and they're doing things together. Ultimately, she has to keep her schools not just functioning, she has to keep it in the press. She has to keep it in public consciousness. And as the legislature has a keen eye on the ag school, it's 4 miles down the road because the legislation says it has to be within 10 miles of the Capitol, so we can keep an eye on it. It makes sense. If they're going out to look at them, maybe they'll see us too. But she's not the only person in this fight. This is a much broader movement. And oftentimes the Rogers sisters are totally overshadowed by some folks over in Kalamazoo who are waging a similar war. Their names are Reverend James and Lucinda Stone. Now, these are both Vermonters. They moved to Michigan after James, who is an American Baptist minister, is ordained and is called to the church in Kalamazoo. Then, surprise, guess what? You're the pastor, you're also the president and main faculty member of the college that is associated with us. And your wife, oh, naturally, she'll want to teach the girls while she's here. Now, Lucinda came with a chip on her shoulder, frankly, because Lucinda was a very smart little girl who wanted to go to university. And her heart was broken when she learned as a girl she couldn't do that in Vermont. Nobody would accept her. And people laughed at her when she talked about this publicly. So she came, I think, kind of egging for a fight, if you will. And happily, the school that they are assigned to, that old Huron Institute in Kalamazoo, has the history of being one of the branch schools. So she is still, in her mind, working at a place that should be preparing students for the university. And though the girls and boys are supposed to be segregated by floor in this building, she and her husband mix up their classes all the time. So they are creating a more co-ed entity. And of course, even though they are no longer tied to the university, basically the branch schools got all the money and the university was like, hey, where did our funding go? So they cut off the branches. There is still this consciousness that they were part of the same system. And interestingly, it is one of Lucinda's students, former students, Alice Boise, who is the first woman to actually get permission to take classes at the University of Michigan. Now, she has an in. When she asks the regents for permission to attend in 1866, they give her permission to attend her father's class. He is on faculty, but they will only let her go to his lectures. Apparently, if daddy's in the room, she will still be safe. This is not enough for Alice, though. And frankly, it is not enough for her father. So the family picks up and leaves Michigan. He is hired at the new private University of Chicago. And Alice Boise will become the first woman to graduate from the University of Chicago a few years later. Now we're now in the 1860s. So the female college has existed for over a year. And remember how I keep saying Abigail needs press? Well, she goes as high in the food chain as she can get when it comes to women's publications. She gets Sarah Josepha Hale, who is the editor of Godey's Ladies Book, the middle-class female publication of America. This is ultimate parlor respectability. She even gets Hale to say good things about her college. It's pretty remarkable. Now, by this point in time, there is a growing sense that maybe if the university is not going to give in, maybe we'll just say, okay, let's do the school for girls. And she is hoping by this point in time that the university will, that the state will take over this female college. It's in Lansing. If they can start to fund it, it's already here. We've got a building, it's up and running. It can be like the ag school. But the state still won't do it. Now, they're punting off in part to Congress, because by this point in time, the Morrill Act has passed. And so there are big land grants being given and sold to fund things like the ag school down the road. This happens a few years after it's founded. So maybe they can get a land grant to do this female education thing too. Well, Congress is not on board. So the legislature of 1867 and 1869 passed nice resolutions that say, Mr. Board of Regents, maybe you should reconsider your position. But it's about that polite. And it's a should. It's not you have to. It's not get your act together, guys. And in March of 1869, after she has watched probably firsthand, I see Abigail is the kind of person who would attend a session and make her presence felt there. One night in a meeting afterwards, after session is done, she stands up and gives a speech. And you can tell this woman is just fuming. You can see the smoke coming out of her ears. She says, this legislature voted $130,000 for the next 2 years for the education of young men. But the women received nothing of what they asked but much advice. This woman is pissed, and she is done, frankly. But she can't be done, except unfortunately she is. Delia is injured in a bad carriage accident in 1869. Abigail goes out east on a trip, probably in part to fundraise. She would leave on occasion. She went and did Civil War work. Ask Matt about that if you want to know it. He talks about it in his book. She dies in the fall of 1869. The school closes. Delia can't keep it going on her own in the condition she's in. So have they lost? Has it all been for naught? Well, something interesting happens. How many of us, when we go vote, aren't quite sure what to do when it comes to the Board of Regents and the MSU's trustees and the Wayne State Board of Governors? Well, sometimes it's really good that we vote for these people. 1869, 1870 is a prime example because there's a new member now on the Board of Regents. His name is Mr. Willard. He's from Kalamazoo. He is a very good friend of James and Lucinda Stone, who have been filling his ears with their thoughts on education for a long time. There is also now a new interim president at the University of Michigan, President Freeze. He will not serve long, but he's there long enough. And suddenly, in the lead up to the January meeting of the Board of Regents, they start counting noses and they realize, we have a majority. We can actually do this thing now that people have been asking us to do for 20 years. And the worst part is when they decide to do it, they don't even have to change anything. There is no law, there is no rule, there is no policy in writing that has prevented the regents from accepting women. It is nothing but damned old tradition. They go back to those founding documents and they realize, oh yeah, it just says residents of Michigan. It doesn't even say citizens. There isn't even an implication there that you have to be able to vote, so you have that way around. So they passed a resolution that says the Board of Regents recognize the right of every resident of Michigan to the enjoyment of the privileges afforded by the university, and that no rule exists in any of the university statutes for the exclusion of any person from the university who possess the requisite literary and moral qualifications. Done. Almost instantly, women start to seek out admission. The first admitted is Madeline Stockwell. There's a dorm on campus named for her. Some of you probably know it well. It's up on the hill where the women traditionally lived when we were segregated by gender. Madeline Stockwell was another former student of Lucinda Hinsdale Stone. And thus, it is Lucinda who is often held up as the mother of coeducation in Michigan. To be frank, Lucinda also lives another 30 years. That helps. She gets to tell the story over and over again. And don't get me wrong, I love Lucinda. She is one of my heroes for multiple reasons. But I wish she shared a little more of that credit with the Rogers sisters through time, because it often takes multiple people coming at an issue from multiple angles to actually create change. And as soon as the university realizes they can start admitting women, well, guess what? That ag school down the road decides to start doing the same thing. And so the first woman enrolls in 1870. Likewise, ultimately, Eva Coriel, you will see here on the screen, becomes the first woman to graduate from the agricultural school. And what is so interesting to me is early on in those first years, there's no separate female course for these women. Eva Coriel works in the fields and does the agricultural work alongside the boys. Madeline Stockwell is so far ahead in her education, she actually tests in at a sophomore level. And there are other girls who will test in at a junior level. So she is actually not the first graduate, but she does go on to graduate. She marries a fellow student who dies young, and she actually becomes an independent businesswoman in Kalamazoo who is able to support herself for the rest of her life. So these women indeed prove that they are the equals of the men around them, and that they too can benefit from a college education. So with that, our story ends for this evening. I hope I've given you a slightly different look at what often becomes like a sentence in a history book. And then Madeline Stockwell entered the University of Michigan. Done. Well, a lot had to happen before Madeline Stockwell could be the first woman to go to U of M, to open the university and the college to coeducation. And there are many other pieces of the story that I have missed tonight. There is, I hope, more scholarship to be done in the future by someone to carry this story forward. But it is, if nothing else, a reminder that being persistent is important, and being persistent in Lansing, in the capital, is doubly important, because you get attention that you would not have any other place. So thank you for joining us tonight for Rise in Progress. I would be happy at this point in time to take any questions that we might have, either in person or virtually. And I will also put in a quick plug for June's program. We will be getting back together on June 18th. We will be going back up to our new exhibit room on the ground floor for Art Adorns the Paths of Life. This is, for those of you who came, this is the exhibit on the other side of the room. This looks at the William Wright Company, who did the Capitol's original interior decoration from about 1885 to 1890. It also looks at the Weidman family. Christian Weidman was a German immigrant who came to Detroit in the 1860s, spent the rest of his life working for the Wright Company, was the foreman for the Capitol job, and a few years ago, his descendants started giving us his personal drawings. And we have used those pieces to help identify Wright Company commissions across the country. So join us on June 18th, and of course, you'll get an email from me as normal for that next story. So thank you very much. And are there any questions at this point? Yes. Do we know what Madeline Stockwell studied? So she did not study medicine or law. There were other women who did early on. In fact, a lot of the early medical graduates from U of M who are women will either go on to found women's clinics or hospitals, or some of them will become medical missionaries, actually. That was an okay career path for a woman. She takes what we would today consider, she graduates from LS&A, so literature, science, and arts. She takes a broader path. So she is studying literature, she is studying languages. There's a lot of those classical components still, but it is not a school that is set up to send you specifically into one career field. You're welcome. Other questions? May. Did the recent expansion of newspapers on newspapers.com help me with this research? No, because I did a lot of it like 2 years ago. It would be lovely to have today, and quite frankly, I should add that to my list because I have not gone back through. If you don't spend your life on newspapers.com, like the people who work here, until recently, the Lansing newspapers were only digitized from it was during the Civil War. Is it 59 it started? 59 to like 1866. So some of these were before, some were after, some I had citations for already because people had written short articles on this before. Some things I just went looking for because I could see, ooh, there's something in the journal here in the chamber, so I need to go look that up. Do I have more work to do though, thanks to that? Yes, but I have not done that work in the last month since I realized that was a thing. Any other questions? Yes.
No, it's my question. So you mentioned that $130,000 was given to the agricultural school. You know, the same like with the normal school.
So I think that 130,000 was for the normal school and the university combined. I don't remember specifically how it broke down. I don't remember what the funding was for the normal school. It was not as much because it was not considered to be a 4-year course. Some of the courses were only a few months long. I think the longest course they offered at that point in time may have only been 2 years. So it was not funded at the same level. And they also did not have, they did not necessarily have faculty with the same pedigree, if you will. So my guess is it was funded at a much lower level, but that's speculation. I don't know precise numbers. Anything else?
It's interesting. My limited amount of information I included about the college in my book. I mean, it's in the Civil War. It was interesting, but I got the impression it was a real community effort.
Absolutely.
Even having local citizens put up students, in their homes, and Abigail and Billy reaching out to the community and really embracing it.
Yes.
Something as simple as having the community come together to help some projects for the college.
Yep. Yeah.
This is really kind of warmed my heart that community got in the bank as much as they did.
And Delia would stay in Lansing the rest of her life. She is buried over in Mount Hope Cemetery. If you join us for our cemetery tour in July, we'll probably walk past her at one point in time. She would later become a founding member of the Lansing Women's Club. Lansing was her home, and her sister, so Eliza sent some of her children to Lansing. The family back in New York clearly supported this as well because they sent nieces and nephews who were old enough that within a couple of years they could start help teaching. And the family continued to be involved in Lansing for a long time. Of course, you get some people who work in state government because Lansing's small and every family has people who work in state government. They will end up, though, being involved in some of the manufacturing efforts that crop up during the 20th century, and they do pretty well for themselves. So this is a family that very much becomes part of the core of Lansing. Yeah. Ooh, okay. Well, I don't know much about Wayne, but I know I think that comes out of a teacher's college as well. I know there is an attempt to establish a teacher's college in Detroit. I think it's connected to what becomes Wayne, but that is also a college before it's a university. I have no idea when they get their medical school. I know the university from pretty early on has a medical school. I want to say it may officially be organized in the late 1840s. Early 1850s. I will tell you though, so the legislature and the Board of Regents had a lot of beefs with one another. And this is in part why in the 1850 Constitution, they write the Constitution in such a way that the regents are now directly elected because the regents are sick of being appointed by the legislature and having the legislature then tell them what to do. And the biggest beef between the legislature and the university throughout the 19th century is over the medical school. And if they're going to be a more scientific medical school, or if they're going to be a homeopathic medical school. And there is a legislator almost every session who introduces a bill or an amendment to a budget bill that says you can only get your money if you teach homeopathy as well as more scientific medicine. And this ticks a lot of people at U of M Medical School off continually. And it is a huge, huge issue that bounces back and forth and back and forth. But they are granting degrees in medicine by at least the 1850s, if not earlier. And somebody on faculty at U of M a few years ago wrote a book about the history of U of M medicine, actually. So if anybody cares, there was a whole book on this subject. I have not read it. It's on the list. Suzanne? Oh, interesting.
Basically between schools and just jazz up and just
Oh, interesting. So an attendee was saying, for those of you who are remote, the book, The Great Influenza, the first section of it is basically about medical schools in America and listed 3 main medical schools as kind of on the cutting edge before the pandemic of the Spanish flu pandemic, being Johns Hopkins and a medical school in Pennsylvania and U of M. I will also say, just as kind of a coda to this, Freeze is only president of U of M for a brief period of time. I'm not sure if he even made it to 2 years. He didn't want to be president. He wanted to teach. So he went back to being a normal faculty member. However, the next person they hire is James Angel, who is an institution at U of M. He is president for 30 years plus, another radical Vermonter. And he is super supportive of coeducation. And as he travels the world, because he will go all over, he helps set up relationships with Asian countries. So you see a lot of these early these female medical missionaries coming out of U of M, going to China, going to Japan. He says really good things about coeducation everywhere. And when he is invited to speak at other commencements and other schools, sometimes if it's not even what he's supposed to be talking about, he still goes off script and talks about it. So he's kind of seen as the champion of this movement after the fact. Kendall.
Around what, 1870 is when the breakthrough happened?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you haven't researched this yet, or anybody else. Was there a ripple effect? Did other colleges see what had happened at U of M?
Yes.
And then, or university, whatever.
Yes.
And then were women able to achieve there? So
the question is there a ripple effect? And the answer is yes. Iowa makes it there before, actually. They start admitting women before U of M does, but U of M is considered to be on a different tier, so it's a bigger deal. There are some people who push back. So there is a guy who I will not name, even if I could remember him, because I don't want to give him any endorsement, who writes this really famous book from the period. That basically says if you let your daughters go to college, they will cease to be female after a while. There was a serious argument that comes up in opposition to this, that, to put it politely, women would lose their ability to reproduce if they were too educated. So basically, as your brain grows, other parts of your body shrivel up. A lot of people at U of M got super angry about this and spoke publicly against it. So this is not a smooth one-way street, but yes, there are other schools who start to look around and say, well, the walls have not fallen down in Ann Arbor. Chaos is not reigning. It's just fine. And you know what? The boys are behaving themselves in class. The ladies are behaving themselves in class. They can all socialize together. And you know what? They do fine. The girls don't hold the boys back. Now, I will say it takes the longest to convince all of the medical faculty. Early on, they want to have the boys and the girls in separate rooms for some of the medical lectures. But the truth is, eventually the professors get sick of teaching everything twice. And so they just give in. And there is a school of thought among people who study education in the Midwest and know far more about this than I do, that one reason coeducation takes off in this part of the country, unlike the East, is because we're too cheap to pay for 2 of every school. We only want to pay so much in our tax dollars. We want the most bang for our buck. So if that means our daughters and sons go to school together, so be it. Yes.
My question is that this is in the infancy of the college and university, particularly as you mentioned, in relation to the Civil War. So my question is, it's so difficult to reach financial viability. What impact did the war have, and did, by chance, the involvement of us being, obviously, Michigan being a northern exporting state, did that also open opportunities to be more conducive for female students to have an avenue when the war ended?
That's interesting. Let me repeat the question for those who are virtual, and then I'll let Matt take a stab at answering that. So the question was, because Michigan is in the north, because we are on the side that wins the Civil War, does this help gain more support for coeducation? Is there more federal support, and is there more money? From my research, I don't know. I know in general, historians of women in the 19th century see the Civil War as a watershed moment because there are so many men gone. Women have to start doing more. You know, it's the classic Rosie the Riveter story that we learn in the 20th century. It all happened in the 1860s. If a sixth of Lansing's population enlists and disappears, well, somebody has to print the papers, bring in the harvest, teach the kids, and maybe even pray in church on Sunday. So I can't say how much of that is specific to Michigan. I will tell you though, here it comes, Harriet Tenney reference of the evening. It is something that is pointed to when women start to get government jobs. Women did their part in the war effort, so they deserve a bigger piece of the political pie, or of the government dollars, if you will. I am sure Abigail Rogers supported the Union, but I am also sure she was very aware that she would get more good publicity for her school by supporting the Union cause very visibly. Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
It's interesting, some of the first students who were male and female, brothers and sisters from the same families, was fight with companies that formed in Lansing. That's what I can say. Oh, so obviously the support that the local women gave to the ladies' aid societies, which led them to supporting temperance movements, to supporting freedmen's associations, to jumping into the women's suffrage movement too. So they all kind of get their start. And you know, a lot of these women that went on to this whole incredible position of power and importance that got their start, you know, after the Michigan female power.
Yes. What Matt was saying was that a lot of these same women who are part of the Ladies' Aid Society, these are the same people who are sending their kids to the female college to some extent. You know, they are also supporting the war, and as their sons are going off, their daughters are still here. So there is a sense that the community is involved again with all of this, but also that it is in many cases the same women who are supporting the war effort who will find their voice on education and temperance and suffrage. To some extent, it's just women who are willing to become public figures. And Glenna Matthews writes on this excellent book called The Rise of Public Woman, is really at the core of so much of what I've learned over the last few years. She argues that the Civil War made it acceptable to be a public woman because you became public by doing good for the boys in the field. And the newspaper said good things about you. So for the first time, it was okay for women to be talked about in the press because they were being lauded for doing good things. And so many women gained a new level of persona through this war work. And then they weren't sure they wanted to give it up because they suddenly realized, oh, we can meet together and we can do things. And so if we helped win the war, why can't we fix the drinking problem? Why can't we fight for the vote? Why can't we look for more educational opportunities for our daughters? Anything else? All right, well, thank you so much for coming this evening.